They told Freya the position was temporary. 6 weeks, maybe 8. The pay was extraordinary, $12,000 a month deposited in cash. The NDA was 43 pages long, and the lawyer who slid it across the table looked like he hadn't smiled since the 90s. But Freya didn't know that signing her name on page 43 was agreeing to disappear from her ordinary life entirely. She thought she was tutoring the son of a wealthy businessman. She didn't know she was walking into the home of Dax Renner, the man who controlled every shipping container moving through the port of Vancouver, and a great deal else that never appeared on a manifest. And she certainly didn't know that 3 months later, she'd be lying on the cold concrete of a hockey arena parking garage, bleeding from her side, having thrown herself between a gun and a child who didn't share a drop of her blood. This is the story of how a broke substitute teacher brought one of the most dangerous men in British Columbia to his knees. The interview didn't happen in an office. It happened in the back seat of a blacked-out Escalade crawling along the Burrard Bridge at 9 in the morning, rain hammering the roof so hard Freya could barely hear herself think. The man across from her wasn't the employer. He introduced himself as Mr. Tanner, a lawyer clearly, from the cut of his suit and the precision with which he'd arranged his documents on his knee. He looked at her CV the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, clinically, impersonally. Northwestern University, early childhood education, he said without looking up. But you left your master's program in the 2nd semester. Why? He was diagnosed with a degenerative condition, MS. I needed income immediately, not in 2 years. Tanner finally glanced at her. His expression didn't change. The salary is $12,000 a month cash. Your accommodation and meals are covered. You will have no expenses for the duration of your employment. Freya's hands tightened in her lap. $12,000. That was 8 months of her brother Callum's medication. That was the physiotherapy she hadn't been able to afford since she'd been cut from the Burnaby School District. What's the catch? She asked. Tanner set down the CV. Privacy. Total and absolute. You will not maintain social media during your employment. You will not discuss your employer's name, address, schedule, or associations with anyone outside the household. You will not leave the property without an escort. He paused. If you breach those terms, Miss Vidal, the legal consequences will be the least of your concerns. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it the way a weatherman announces a cold front. Freya thought of the collection notice on her kitchen counter. She thought of Callum sitting in their apartment in New Westminster, pretending he wasn't exhausted, pretending his hands weren't shaking. She thought of the stack of bills she'd been rearranging like furniture, as though the order of them made any difference. I have one charge, Tanner continued. Milo, 7 years old. He lost his mother 14 months ago. He has not spoken at school since. He has not spoken to his father in weeks. He set the folder aside. 3 tutors in 4 months. None of them lasted. Freya looked at the rain streaking down the window. Where do I sign? The Renner estate sat behind a stone wall on a private road in West Vancouver, high enough up the mountain that on clear days you could see the whole harbor. Freya saw it for the first time through a slick of rain. The gate opened without a sound. The driveway was lined with mature firs, their branches heavy. Men in dark coats stood at intervals along the perimeter. She was shown to her suite by the housekeeper, Mrs. Quill, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the expression of someone who had survived more than she intended to discuss. The suite was larger than Freya's entire apartment. She set her single duffel bag down, and it looked like a lost dog. Stay to the east wing, Mrs. Quill said, adjusting the thermostat. The west wing is Mr. Renner's office and private study. He keeps unusual hours. He does not like unexpected company. When do I meet him? Freya asked. Mrs. Quill looked at her with something that was almost pity. If you're lucky, she said, not for quite some time. Freya met Milo an hour later. He was sitting in the middle of his bedroom floor, surrounded by hundreds of Lego pieces, arranging them into patterns that didn't seem to be leading to anything. He didn't look up when she came in. He was small for 7, with dark hair that curled at his temples and his father's jaw, though Freya didn't know that yet. His shoulders were braced for an argument. Hi, she said from the doorway. I'm Freya. I'm not going to make you talk. He glanced at her sideways. I'm going to sit in that chair, she said, and read my book. You keep doing what you're doing. She crossed the room, sat down, pulled a paperback out of her bag, and opened it. For 40 minutes, the only sound was the rain on the window and the quiet click of plastic. Then very quietly, a piece of Lego slid across the floor toward her feet. It was a wing, an orange one, from something aerodynamic. She looked down at it. She looked at the pile behind him. She set down her book. Is this from the R-Wing kit? He turned slowly and stared at her, suspicious. "I built one with my brother," she said, "before he got sick. It took us 4 hours and we lost 3 pieces to the couch cushions." Milo pointed at the box in the corner. She crossed the room, opened it, and they spent the next 2 hours on the floor, building a Star Fox R-ring that turned out surprisingly well, given that Milo kept swapping the pieces she handed him and she let him. By dinner the room was tidy. Milo was asleep on the rug with his cheek on his arm. Freya carried him to bed. She didn't meet Dax Renner that night. She met him 4 days later. It was past 2 in the morning when she came downstairs for a glass of water. The house was silent as ice. She'd almost reached the kitchen when she heard the back door open. The smell reached her first, sharp and metallic and unmistakable. Blood. She stepped back into the shadows of the hallway and pressed herself against the wall. 4 men were coming in through the service entrance. 3 of them were supporting the 4th, a tall man in a dark suit, one hand pressed against his ribs. A 5th man was already on his phone, voice low. "Get Kovacs. Tell him it's a through and through left side. Yes, now." The man in the center lifted his head. He was taller than the others, well over 6 feet, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had been set for war. His eyes, when they caught the ambient light from the stairwell, were a pale, cold gray. He was wearing a white dress shirt soaked dark from the collar to the waistband. He looked like he had somewhere important to be and had been briefly interrupted by someone else's poor decision. This was Dax Renner. Freya's slipper shifted against the marble. A quiet sound, nothing dramatic, but every head in the room turned. 4 weapons came up. Freya pressed herself flatter against the wall, her whole body locked. "Don't," Dax said. His voice was low and rough, the kind that carried without effort. "It's the tutor." The weapons lowered. They didn't holster. One of his men, a compact, watchful man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, stepped forward. She saw the blood, Dom. Dax pushed off the man supporting him and walked toward her, slowly, each step measured. He stopped 2 feet away. He smelled of gunpowder and cold rain and something expensive underneath it all. He was devastatingly, inconveniently good-looking in a way that felt almost like a challenge. Freya Vidal, not a question. "I just wanted water," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved credit for. His grey eyes held hers. There was also no cruelty, just calculation, fast and thorough. "You saw nothing tonight," he said quietly. "You came downstairs, you got your water, you went back to bed. Are we clear?" "Yes." "Good." He held her gaze for 1 more second, as if filing the information away. Then he turned. "Get Kovacs, and get her out of here." She had her water, she went back to bed. She did not sleep. Over the following weeks, Freya learned what she hadn't known when she signed the NDA. She learned it in pieces. From the pattern of the guards' rotation, from the way certain cars always parked facing outward, from the coded language on phone calls she wasn't meant to overhear, from the men who arrived after midnight and left before dawn. Dax Renner was not just an entrepreneur with complicated privacy requirements. He was the head of an organization that had controlled the West Coast's grey economy for 2 decades, port logistics, import contracts, certain real estate arrangements that the city of Vancouver preferred not to scrutinize too closely. His men were loyal the way soldiers are loyal, not out of affection, but out of history. Freya focused on Milo. Milo, who had started talking to her in short declarative sentences by the end of week 2. Milo, who had a devastating sense of humor he'd clearly inherited from someone, because it wasn't visible in any adult in that house. Milo, who had stopped eating properly since his mother died and had to be coaxed into finishing a meal. One afternoon in late October, they were in the back garden. The mountain air was sharp and clean, the maples burning red and gold. Milo was trying to throw a hockey puck into a net he'd set up against the garden wall. Badly, because he kept gripping the stick wrong. Freya had grown up in Sudbury. She knew how to hold a hockey stick. She adjusted his hands. He got it in on the 3rd try. "Told you," she said. "You didn't say anything," he said. "I implied it." He almost smiled. That was victory. A black SUV appeared at the gate, moving too fast. The guards at the perimeter went taut. Freya felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air pressure, the kind you feel before lightning. "Milo," she said, her voice going flat. "Inside now." He looked at the gate. "Right now." She didn't raise her voice. She stepped toward him, redirecting him by the shoulders toward the back door. "Go." He went. She followed, ushering him through the mudroom and turning the lock, just as Dax came out of his study, a phone in one hand. He looked at the closed door. "Who told you to do that?" "The car at the gate was moving wrong," she said. Milo was pressed against her leg. I grew up in a neighborhood where you learn the difference between someone lost and someone looking. It wasn't lost. Dax stared at her. Something behind his eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. It was a probe, he said. Rival family. Testing response time. He looked at Milo, who had buried his face against Freya's hip. He looked at the way Milo was holding on to her, and something moved in his jaw. Good instincts. He needs dinner, Freya said, and you're sitting with us tonight. The silence that followed was considerable. I have calls. Mr. Renner. She kept her voice quiet, aware of Milo listening. He needs to see you at a table, not on a screen, not through a doorway, at a table. He didn't answer, but that night, Dax Renner ate dinner with his son for the first time in 3 weeks. He didn't talk much. He didn't know how, and Freya didn't force it. But he was there, and Milo kept stealing glances at him the way you look at something you're afraid will disappear. By the end of dinner, Milo had eaten everything on his plate. Freya caught Dax watching her while she helped Milo clear the dishes. She didn't look away first. His name was Gareth Renner, second in command, charming in the smooth, polished way of men who've practiced it. He found Freya in the upstairs hallway on a Wednesday afternoon, his shoulder against the wall, smile in place. You've made yourself comfortable, he said. I'm doing my job, she said. Are you? He tilted his head. His eyes were lighter than Dax's, hazel, and somehow less trustworthy for it. Seems like you're doing a bit more than that. Making yourself hard to ignore, he dropped his voice. Careful, Freya. Dax doesn't do well with attachments. They make him sentimental, and sentimental men make mistakes. She stepped around him. Thanks for the advice. It's not advice, he said to her back. It's a reminder. She didn't know then what it actually was. She found out later. Milo had his first real hockey game. Not practice, not drills, but an actual game with actual spectators, at the community rink in West Van, on a grey Friday in November. He'd been talking about it for 2 weeks. He'd barely slept the night before. He'd made Freya check his equipment 3 separate times that morning. In the hall mirror before they left, Dax was straightening his collar. He looked like a man preparing for something he wasn't sure he deserved to attend. You look fine, Freya said, coming down the stairs. He turned. Something crossed his face. Fast, then made an effort today. A dark green dress. Her hair down. She'd told herself it was for the occasion, not for him, and had mostly convinced herself. The dress code. She started. It's not the dress. He cleared his throat, turned back to the mirror. Let's go. 3 SUVs, bulletproof glass, Milo vibrating between them in his gear bag. Freya had his water bottle and his spare gloves. Dax sat across from them, phone in hand, though for once he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at Milo. Dad, Milo said, what if I fall? Dax looked at his son. In his world, falling meant something terminal. He didn't have a ready answer for a boy asking about a hockey rink. Freya put her hand on Milo's shoulder. Then you get up, she said. The whole point is to get back up. Nobody's keeping score of the falls. Dax glanced at her, a look she felt more than saw. The arena smelled of ice and concession popcorn. Parents in parkas milled around, thermoses in hand. Tim Hortons cups everywhere. An ordinary Saturday afternoon, or close enough. Freya watched Milo disappear into the change room and felt something in her chest ache quietly at how badly she wanted this to go well for him. He found them in the stands before the warm-up. He was terrified. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his helmet sat slightly too big, and he kept adjusting it. Dax sat in the second row. He sat the way he sat everywhere, straight, deliberate, contained. When Milo came onto the ice and scanned the crowd, he locked onto his father like a compass finding north. He gave his son a single nod. Firm and certain. I'm here, I see you. Milo's shoulders dropped 2 inches. He skated to his position. The game was ordinary and messy and wonderful. Milo fell twice and got up both times without drama. Freya spent most of it with her hands in her lap, cheering every touch he made. Dax didn't cheer, but he didn't look at his phone, and he didn't look away from the ice. When Milo came off for a line change and looked up at them from the bench, Dax raised 2 fingers. Quiet, just enough. Milo grinned so wide it was visible from the second row. Dax leaned slightly toward Freya. Thank you, he said low, for this. He needed you to show up, she said. You showed up. I wouldn't have, without you pushing. Their faces were closer than she'd accounted for. The arena was loud and he'd had to lean in to be heard. She could feel the warmth of him. Dax, she said it instinctively, then caught herself. Sorry, Mr. Renner. Dax, he said, when we're not at the house. He was still looking at her. She looked back. Then Gareth appeared at the end of their row, and all warmth drained from Dax's face in an instant. Gareth's expression was wrong. Too careful. "We have a problem," he said. The parking garage beneath the arena. They were moving fast through the concrete levels, Dax's hand at the small of Freya's back, 2 guards flanking Milo. The route back to the vehicles was supposed to be 60 seconds. What kind of problem? Freya kept her voice low, matching Dax's pace, her hand firm on Milo's shoulder. "Someone flagged our location," Dax said. "The game wasn't on any public calendar." The SUV was on level 2, she could see it, black engine running. She heard the other engine first. A second vehicle, dark-colored, accelerating from the far end of the level, moving wrong. "Get in," Dax said. She got Milo in, buckled, pushed his head down. "Stay down, do not sit up." She was half-turned to get in herself when she saw the second man. Not from the car. From behind a concrete pillar, 15 feet away, a figure in dark clothes, moving low and fast, with something in his hands that she recognized from the shape of it before she processed it consciously. Dax had drawn his weapon and turned toward the first car. The 2 guards were down behind the SUV, returning fire. Nobody was facing the pillar. Freya did not calculate. She did not weigh anything. She moved the way you move when your brother is falling, without thinking, because thinking takes time you don't have. She stepped back into the open doorway. She put herself between the gun and Milo. The world compressed into 3 sounds, the crack of the shot, the ring of concrete, and something that hit her like a fist in her left side, hard enough to spin her. She landed against the seat. Milo was screaming. She heard it from somewhere far away. She pressed her hand to her side and felt heat. "Check the kid. Check him first." "Milo," her voice came out wrong. "You okay?" He was staring at her. His face was white and wet. He was okay. She could see he was okay. Good, she thought, and then the light started going sideways. Freya. Dax was there, suddenly at the door. His voice sounded like it was coming from the other end of the arena. He caught her before she went down. "Freya, stay with me." "He's okay," she said. "He's okay." "You are not okay." His voice broke on something she'd never heard in it before. "You need to stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay right here." "Bossy," she managed. "Freya." The garage went dark. She woke in a room she didn't recognize, to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of rain. The ceiling was white. The sheets were white. Machines beeped to her left. She turned her head. Dax was in a chair beside her bed. He was in the same clothes from the arena, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled. His face looked like it had been awake for a very long time. Milo, her throat was sandpaper. Home. Safe. 2 guards on his room and Mrs. Quill downstairs with the tactical patience of a woman who has seen actual war. He leaned forward, put a cup with a straw to her lips. She drank. The bullet cracked a rib and tore through muscle. 3 inches to the right and we'd be having a different conversation. He looked at her steadily. "You're going to be fine." "You stayed," she said. "I've been here 6 hours." He said it simply, like it was obvious. Like there was no version of events in which he would have been anywhere else. "The game wasn't on any public calendar," she said. "Someone inside gave out the schedule." His jaw went tight. "I know. Gareth was the only one who called me a liability, twice to your face." The grey of his eyes went very flat. "I know that too." He reached for her hand and held it, carefully, like it was something worth being careful with. His hands were larger than hers and very warm, and she thought, distantly, that she had been wanting him to do this for longer than she was prepared to admit. "Why did you do it?" he asked, quiet and direct, the way he did everything. The contract was for tutoring, not for this. She looked at him. He looked like he genuinely needed the answer. Like he'd been sitting in this chair, turning the question over for hours, and couldn't arrive at anything that made sense in the world he understood. "Because he's 7, she said, "and I love him. I know that's not in the job description. I know I'm just the tutor." She stopped. Started again. "But I love him like he's mine, and I wasn't going to stand there." Something in Dax's face opened up. "You're not just the tutor," he said. "You haven't been for a long time." The door opened. Gareth stepped in, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. He crossed the room with that familiar, easy confidence, the smile already arranged. He dropped the flowers into the visitor chair with a careless flick of his wrist, like a prop he no longer needed. Dax was standing in the shadow on the far side of the bed. Gareth hadn't seen him. "I'll make it quick," Gareth said to Freya. He reached into his jacket. "You're a good person, honestly. That's the problem. Good people make Dax slow." He had a syringe. "You should have taken the 12,000 and stayed quiet," he said, almost gently. "But you had to go and become indispensable. You had to make him feel like a father again." He uncapped the needle. "And I can't run an empire with a man who's worried about hockey games." "Gareth," Dax said. Gareth went completely still. The syringe hovered over the IV line. Dom. His voice shifted conciliatory fast. I came to check on her. I heard every word. Dax moved around the bed. He wasn't hurrying. He didn't need to. I've been here for 6 hours. The whole time you were telling our people I was still at the docks. He stopped to the Cho family. Milo's schedule, the arena, the vehicle route. Untraceable number. But you're the only person in this organization who ever called Freya a liability. You said it to my face. Twice. Gareth's composure fractured. You were throwing it all away. For a school teacher, Dax. Everything we built. You were turning it into a dinner table and a hockey schedule. Yes, exactly that. That's exactly what I was doing. It was not a long confrontation. It was brief and inevitable, and when it was over, the guards who had been waiting in the stairwell came in and removed Gareth Renner from the room. He was shouting something as they dragged him out. The door closed and the shouting stopped. Dax stood at the window for a long moment after. His shoulders were very straight. He looked like a man setting something down that he'd been carrying for years. "How much did you hear?" Freya asked quietly. "Enough." He came back to the chair, sat down, took her hand again. "I set the trap. I needed to be certain before I moved." He looked at her. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." "You should have," she agreed. "No more of that." "No more." He turned her hand over in his. "You need to hear something before I ask you anything. When I turned around in that garage and you were, when I saw you." He stopped. He was not a man who struggled for words. Watching him struggle for them now was its own kind of information. I've made decisions in my life that I can live with. What I felt in that moment is not one of them. I'm not prepared to feel that again. Freya looked at him. This man who ran an empire and hadn't known how to sit at a dinner table, who didn't know how to smile on command but had given his son a nod that said, "I see you," and had meant it with everything he had. "What are you asking me?" she said. "I'm asking if you'll stay." He met her eyes. "Not as an employee. I'll send you wherever you want to go. You and Callum both. With enough that neither of you ever has to worry again. You have done more than anyone could ask, and you have earned every option." He paused. "But if you want to stay, here, with us, I'm asking that, knowing what it is, knowing it doesn't get quiet." Freya thought about her apartment in New Westminster, the bills in their careful stack. The nights she'd sat beside Callum's bed listening to him breathe and told herself they were managing fine. She thought about Milo on the ice, looking up to find his father there. She thought about a grey-eyed man sitting in a hospital chair for 6 hours in clothes covered in her blood, not going anywhere. "Tell me the terms," she said. Something cracked open in Dax's face, just briefly, just enough. "No more secrets," she said. "Not about threats, not about what you're carrying. You don't do it alone anymore, and neither do I. We do it together, or we don't do it." "Together," he said. "Callum comes here. He needs proper care, and I need to stop worrying about him from a distance." "Done. I'll have Mrs. Quill set up the East Suite. And Milo gets a dog. He's been asking Mrs. Quill for 3 months and she keeps deflecting. Mrs. Quill is going to have significant opinions about that. Mrs. Quill will adapt." Dax looked at her, this woman with an IV line and a cracked rib negotiating from a hospital bed, and something in him that had been locked down for a very long time came quietly undone. "Name your terms," he said. "All of them." 8 months later, the estate looked different from the inside. The stone walls were still there. The men still rotated in pairs along the perimeter. But there was a dog now, a scruffy, enormous hound called Biscuit, who had elected Milo as his permanent jurisdiction and Mrs. Quill as his second favorite person, which delighted Freya and mortified Mrs. Quill deeply. Callum was in the East Wing guest suite, within walking distance of a specialist clinic in North Van, improving slowly and fiercely, the way he did everything. And on a Saturday in July, in the back garden with the harbour shining silver below them and the mountains holding the sky up, Freya Vidal stood in a simple ivory dress with a bouquet of wildflowers she'd cut from the garden that morning, watching Dax Renner walk toward her. He was wearing a dark suit. He looked like a man arriving somewhere he'd been trying to find for a very long time. Milo was the ring-bearer. He had taken this responsibility with an almost terrifying seriousness, his face set, the pillow held perfectly level. He'd practiced 3 times that morning with Freya supervising. When she reached Dax, he took both her hands. "You came," he said quietly, like he always said, like he still couldn't entirely believe she'd chosen this. "You gave me the choice," she said. "That matters." The ceremony was small. The guests were few, the people in that compound who'd bled alongside Dax through years that couldn't be discussed in polite company, Mrs. Quill in the second row with her hands folded and her jaw very firm. Callum beside her in his chair with his hand pressed over his mouth. When it came to the vows, they'd both declined the standard language. The officiant simply asked the question, and they answered it. Do you take this woman, knowing the full cost of it, the weight of it, to love and hold completely, through everything that comes after? Dax didn't hesitate. He looked at her the way he'd looked at his son from the second row of a hockey arena. Steady, certain, I see you, I'm here, and said, I do. Every day, every version of it. And you, the officiant asked Freya. She thought about a marble hallway at 2 a.m, a Lego R-wing on a bedroom floor, a parking garage, and a choice that had taken no time at all. She thought about what it meant to love something, not because it was safe, but because it was simply, completely true. I do, she said. The man who had run the West Coast's hardest edges for 20 years kissed his wife with his eyes closed and both hands on her face, and for once the guards looked the other way. Afterward, walking back through the garden with Milo running ahead and Biscuit careening sideways beside him, Dax kept her hand in his. Last chance to renegotiate, he said. Stop fishing, she said. He laughed, a real one, rough and quiet and rare, the kind she'd been collecting for months. She'd noticed the first one at the dinner table, back in November, when Milo had said something that startled Dax out of himself, and he'd laughed before he could stop it, like he'd forgotten he was allowed. She reached up and straightened his collar, the way she'd been doing since the arena. He caught her wrist and held it there, against his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat. I need you to know something, he said. What? He looked at the harbor, then back at her. I hired someone to keep my son present and functioning. That was the brief. You walked in and figured out what he actually needed. And then you figured out what I actually needed, and then you stood in the way of a bullet, because apparently that's just what you do. He shook his head slightly. There isn't a version of this I deserved. Framilo, she called. He skidded to a stop on the garden path, Biscuit piling into the backs of his legs. Did your dad deserve us, she asked. Milo considered this with enormous 7-year-old seriousness. Probably not, he said, but we kept him anyway. Dax closed his eyes. Freya leaned up and kissed his jaw. There's your answer, boss. She wasn't the woman from the NDA anymore. She wasn't the substitute teacher from Sudbury, moving bills around on a kitchen table at midnight. She was Freya Renner, and this enormous, difficult, fiercely guarded life was hers now. Not because she'd stumbled into it, but because when the moment came, she'd stepped forward instead of back. And nobody, not a parking garage, not a needle, not a brother who had confused power for love, had been able to change that.